with that, we're going to return now to the evidence in this case. And Attorney Reddington?
Thank you. Sheila Cavanaugh, please.
All right, well, good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning. Can you tell us your name and spell your last name, please?
My name is Sheila Cavanaugh, Cavanaugh.
And what town do you live in?
I live in the town of Belmont, Massachusetts.
And what are you doing for work now?
I am a board-certified chaplain at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston.
And I didn't know that there were board-certified chaplains. What does that mean?
Well, to become board-certified, you need minimally a master's degree in theology or divinity. You need to complete 1,600 hours of training post your master's degree. 1,200 of those hours are occur in a clinical setting, and 400 of those hours are in a classroom setting where we study various disciplines: psychology, sociology, philosophy, theology, and ethics. Beyond that training, we need to acquire 2,000 hours of additional clinical training before we can even apply for board certification, and we have to demonstrate mastery of 30 competencies before we go to a national board, and they make the assessment. I also need an ecclesiastical endorsement, and in my case, that was from the Archdiocese of Boston, from Cardinal Sean O'Malley.
And before you obtained the board certification in your education to allow you to be a chaplain, what did you do for work?
Prior to becoming a chaplain, which is a second career for me, I was a senior vice president at Fidelity Investments in Boston.
And how long were you senior VP at Fidelity?
16 years.
And are you married?
I am.
You have a family?
I do. My husband and I are the parents of 4 adopted children. When I was pursuing my master's degree at Boston College, it was a 3-year master's, but it took me 5 years because we adopted our 4th child while I was in graduate school. She was a 14-year-old girl from Bogota, Colombia.
And how long have you been working now as a chaplain at Brigham and Women's Hospital?
7 years.
In the course of your duties as a chaplain at Brigham and Women's Hospital, did circumstances bring you in contact with Lindsay Clancy?
Yes, they did.
Can you tell the jurors what happened?
I arrived on the morning of Wednesday, January 25th, 2023. I arrived at approximately 8:30 that morning because I was there to relieve the overnight chaplain who was carrying the pager. I was taking over the pager shift, which went from 9 to 1 p.m., although I was working a full day. When I arrived that morning, she said to me, "Did you hear the news?" And
so
Sustain.
Okay.
So you can't, you got to object, so you can't say what someone told you, okay? That's called hearsay?
Okay.
Okay. So I can say, as a result of the conversation with that person, what happened?
I was summoned to the Director of Spiritual Care's office.
Did you have a conversation with her?
I did.
All right. And as a result of that conversation, what did you do?
I went to Unit 8C in the Tower building of Brigham to meet with Lindsay Clancy.
And what time of day was this?
Roughly between 8:30 and 9:30 that morning.
And when you went in to see Lindsay, what did you observe?
Well, the unit itself was filled with law enforcement officers, both outside the doors of the unit. There was Brigham security, but the unit itself was flooded. There were people from Plymouth County, Boston City Police, Brigham security, so I had to make my way through concentric circles of law enforcement to even get to the room. I was permitted to see Lindsay, although she could not speak at that time.
And what was her condition that you observed?
She was dressed in medical armor. She had tubes, she was intubated, she had bandages, she had a neck brace. She was just covered and layered in equipment that enabled her to breathe.
Now, I'm showing you Exhibit 121 and asking, this may be South Shore, or it could be Brigham and Women's, but is this indicative of what she appeared to be when you first saw her?
That looks like it's from South Shore because when, yes.
Did she have the same?
Similar.
Very similar?
Very similar.
Like that?
Yes, very similar.
Did you see her again on another date?
I did. I saw her the next day. Again, she could not speak. She was intubated as well. That was the first week that she was hospitalized.
When was the next time that you saw her?
The next time I saw her was the following week. I have a calendar here of my visits. I saw her on Tuesday, January 31st, and she had been extubated at that point so she could speak.
So the tube had been removed, she was able to communicate, and that was on January 31st?
I believe she was extubated the weekend of the 28th, but I didn't work that weekend, so I saw her on Tuesday the 31st.
All right. Tell the jurors what you observed and what, if any, conversation you had with Lindsay on the 31st. And let me ask you, how long had it been that they removed the tube?
Perhaps a day or two.
A day or two, okay. Tell the jurors what she said to you.
She continued to look like the photograph you just saw. She was covered, tubes everywhere, the neck brace. Her emotional state was very neutral, a flat affect. But I remember vividly the first thing she said to me. Now, she had heard me for a couple of days. We had been praying together. And so when I went in on Tuesday the 31st, she said to me as I held her hand to comfort her, "I am so glad my children are safe."
Was there any other conversation that you had with her?
I replied theologically to Lindsay, and I said, "Lindsay, your children are safe. They're safe in heaven with God." And I held her hand throughout that conversation, and we prayed for them.
Did she make any other statements to you?
She did. She alluded to having heard a voice, and the voice, according to Lindsay, told her that if she did not follow the command, neither she nor her children would be safe.
And did she indicate whether it was a male voice, a female voice, loud, soft?
She alluded to the fact that it was a male voice and it was persistent.
Any further conversation that you recall about that, not about general things,
That came up several times. I visited Lindsay minimally 14 times while she was hospitalized at the Brigham, and the voice conversation came up several times during several of our visits.
Now, after Lindsay was transferred or cleared to go from Brigham and Women's Hospital, did she go to another facility?
She did. She went to Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital.
And do you know when that was?
That was roughly late February, perhaps around the 23rd.
And did you continue to see Lindsay at Spaulding Rehab?
I did.
You know when she left Spaulding Rehab?
In the late March, early April time frame, perhaps.
Okay. Now, Brigham and Women's Hospital and Spaulding Rehab are under the same umbrella of hospitals. Is that right?
They are. So Brigham and Women's Hospital and Spaulding Rehab are under the Mass General Brigham complex. So for me to visit Lindsay in Spaulding, I was still within the same hospital complex, and her psychiatrist at Spaulding, as well as the chaplains, advised me to continue.
You can't say what anybody told you.
Oh.
So, when she was discharged from Spaulding Rehab, where did she go?
She went to Tewksbury State Hospital.
And fair to say that that would be back around February. Well, it's been a little more than 3 years, 3.5 years.
Yes.
Is that correct? Now, when you saw her in Spaulding Rehab and in Brigham and Women's, you were acting in the course of your job. Is that right?
That's correct.
So you're being compensated, you're getting your paycheck and that type of thing.
Yes.
How many times have you seen Lindsay at Tewksbury Hospital?
Perhaps 200 times.
Tell the jury why you continue to see her for 200.
Sustained.
So, can you tell us how often on a weekly basis you would see her at Tewksbury?
Yes. When Lindsay was admitted to Tewksbury State Hospital, I continued to see her on a weekly basis. We had built up a very comfortable, respectful rapport, and I felt it was in her best interest to continue that as she healed. She was still in deep grief. She was suffering.
Sustained.
So
That opinion will be stricken.
So, did she express anything about her children and their loss over that period of 200 times that you saw her thereabouts in Tewksbury?
Objection.
No, overruled.
Yes.
Other jurors?
Lindsay talks frequently about her children. She loves them deeply. She carries immense grief.
Objection.
Overruled. Next question.
And has that continued to your observation?
It continues presently.
When was the last time that you saw Lindsay in Tewksbury?
Just prior to the trial starting.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Kamala.
Thank you. Excuse me. Good morning.
Good morning.
You were talking about on January 25th, 2023, when you first saw Lindsay in direct examination, and you said that there were a lot of police officers in the area, correct?
Correct.
But you mentioned that some of them were security personnel from the hospital, correct?
Correct.
And you're aware that the security personnel for the hospital don't work for the state police, the Tewksbury police, or the Plymouth County DA's office, correct?
Correct.
So they're separate and apart from law enforcement, correct?
Yes.
And then are you also aware that on January 25th, 2023, there was a search warrant being executed to collect evidence from the defendant and from the belongings that she had at the hospital?
No, I was not aware of that.
Were you aware that that collection of the search warrant required state police and personnel from the crime lab to be present for the collection of evidence?
I was not aware of that.
Were you aware that following that, at any given time, there were only 2 officers, either Tewksbury Police, State Police, or Plymouth County Sheriffs, at her room, the defendant's room, at any given time?
I do recall that.
And they were stationed outside of her room, correct, in the hallway?
Yes.
So that the only time you saw this large amount of officers present was on the 25th, when there were security from the hospital and search warrants being executed, correct?
Perhaps.
Now, you mentioned that on January 31st, 2023, you spoke to the defendant and she told you that she heard a voice telling her that if she did not follow the command, neither she nor her children would be safe, correct?
Correct.
You wrote very detailed notes that are contained in the Brigham and Women's Hospital records regarding your interactions with Lindsay Clancy, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And in all of these notes that detail every time you interacted with her, you never once wrote that she told you she heard a voice or what that voice said, correct?
Correct.
And you also said that this voice, talking about the voice, came up in several of your meetings, correct?
Correct.
And you never once wrote about any of it in any of your very detailed notes, correct?
Well, chaplain notes are not verbatim transcripts of patient conversations. I'm not there to evaluate the patient. I'm there to bear witness to their suffering.
Okay, but the question was, you did not document those statements in your notes, correct?
Correct.
But you did document some other statements in those notes, correct?
Perhaps.
For example, on February 6th, 2023, in a note that you wrote regarding your interaction with the defendant, you said that, or you wrote, Lindsay welcomed the visit and shared her fears of, quote, not being able to walk again, end quote. She continued to express her fears of how her inability to walk may make her vulnerable to others in the future. Do you recall writing that?
Yes.
Do you recall writing on February 9th, 2023, that the defendant was sitting in a chair adjacent to her bed and appeared to be visibly engaged, energized, and hopeful than in previous visits? Do you recall that?
Yes.
You also wrote in that note, Lindsay spoke hopefully of being discharged when the time arrives to Spaulding, correct?
Correct.
And then in February 13th, 2023, you wrote in your note that Lindsay also expressed hopefulness in relation to her physical progress. She feels she has gained considerable physical strength and agility despite an inability to move her legs. She admitted that she feels, quote, deserving of this, end quote, in light of recent events. Do you remember writing that?
Yes.
Do you remember on February 16th, 2023, that you wrote in a note that the defendant expressed hopefulness with the news of her anticipated discharge to Spaulding and seemed uplifted that she would be cared for in a facility with an excellent reputation?
Yes.
Do you recall writing on February 16th, 2023, that Paula, the defendant's mother, and Lindsay, the defendant, were playing a card game as they communed quietly, and that Lindsay expressed hopefulness with the news of her anticipated discharge to Spaulding and seemed uplifted?
Yes.
And again, you've got all these details about her feelings and her thoughts and what she's doing, but nothing about the voices that you spoke of so many times, correct?
Correct.
And speaking of Spaulding, you continued to visit her at Spaulding, correct?
Yes.
In those conversations with her at Spaulding, did she tell you that how in those first weeks at Spaulding, that part of her physical therapy, she was working out with a yellow exercise band? No?
I don't recall her telling me that.
Did she tell you that during that time at Spaulding, she reached out to a social worker there and asked for help filling out SSDI paperwork to get an income?
That would be beyond the scope of our conversation.
She didn't tell you those things?
No.
Thank you.
So, counsel has asked you about her filling out a form for SSDI. Were you aware of what expenses her family were incurring as a result of her physical incapacity, paralysis, and being in the hospital?
From my experience with thousands of patients, I had a very clear idea of the enormous expense.
There's a difference between, as the district attorney very appropriately referred to, that your comments were about her thoughts and her appearance and her feelings. Is that correct?
Correct.
There's a difference, however, between privileged communications with a chaplain and observations of a person's feelings and thoughts, correct?
Correct.
Tell the jury what effect privileged communication has when someone talks to you personally as a chaplain.
Because I'm not a medically trained clinician, I approach patients in a vortex of trust. Some of our chaplains at the Brigham are ordained clergy. And so there's this understanding that when a patient interacts with a chaplain, the conversations are confidential.
Do you put them in medical records?
No.
The words, like Lindsay indicated that she felt uplifted, I think counsel read that twice. Were those your notes, or is that what she said to you? Did she say, I feel uplifted, or is that your
That was my perception of Lindsay. It was not her words.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Como?
You said you're not allowed to put the defendant's words in your medical records. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. It's not that I'm not allowed. It's an understanding, and it's a conversation that's held in confidence with the patient.
Then why are there direct quotes in these medical records from the defendant?
Well, they're not verbatim transcripts.
No, not a transcript of the whole conversation, but you put phrases in quotes. For example, on February 6, 2023, where it says Lindsay welcomed the visit and shared her fears of, quote, not being able to walk again. So those were her words in your note, in quotes, in the medical record, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
I use my best judgment.
Okay. I would move to have these submitted as the next exhibit, the notes of the witness in her interactions with Ms. Clancy at the Brigham and Women's.
Any objection?
No.
All right. They may be admitted.
I have no further questions. Sorry.
Hey, Mr. Reddington, go ahead.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. You may step down. All right, counsel, can I see it?